The Live Desk opens now. Splash the cash. President Obama vows to make BP pay for the Gulf of Mexico oil spill as he prepares to meet their executives. Drink driving. A government report calls for tough new restrictions on the legal alcohol limit. And who's number one? Fabio Capello will leave it to the last minute to announce his England goalkeeper. First this morning, President Obama will meet with senior BP executives later to discuss the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. In his first national address from the Oval Office, he vowed to make the company pay in full for the damage caused by the worst environmental disaster his country had ever faced. This morning, scientists increased their estimates of how much oil is leaking out by 50%. Robert Nisbet reports from Florida's Pensacola Beach. This is the Live Desk, all the news, the business and the sport at 9 and 1 o'clock. And coming up, the Chancellor is expected to announce tough new measures to police the financial system. More from Westminster on that shortly. Shannon Matthews was the schoolgirl abducted by her mother, let down by social services. That's all to come here on the Live Desk. An official government report is calling for tough new restrictions on the legal alcohol limit. A report for the Transport Secretary will suggest cutting the existing legal level to bring it in line with the rest of Europe. The study is also expected to recommend introducing more random breath tests and a lower alcohol limit for new drivers. The role played by social services in the life of the kidnapped schoolgirl Shannon Matthews will be outlined later. Shannon was 9 when she disappeared from her home in West Yorkshire in February 2008. She was eventually discovered at a relative's house. Mark Stone reports.
Please come home, Shannon, if you're out there.
Stone, Sky News.
The Chancellor, George Osborne, is to set out details of a major shake-up of the way the financial system is regulated. The Bank of England is expected to be given far more power to police banks. The announcements will be made in the Chancellor's annual Mansion House speech, Mr Osborne's first. Our political correspondent Jerry Jones is in Westminster. And Jerry, what's all this going to mean for the banks then?
Well, there's an awful lot for George Osborne to talk about because it feels like...
Injured members of the military will begin transferring to a new super hospital in Birmingham today. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital, which cost nearly £550 million to build, will take over from the city's Selly Oak Hospital as the main treatment centre for wounded personnel. Lisa Dowd is there for us. And Lisa, what about the operation to transfer these patients?
Yeah, it's a huge task and it's taken.
Police and the prosecution service in Northern Ireland are considering whether to bring charges against soldiers involved in the Bloody Sunday killings. Yesterday, an inquiry by Lord Savile concluded that those killed were innocent protesters. 14 people died in 1972 after members of the Parachute Regiment opened fire without warning. A woman from Merseyside has been charged with concealment of birth after the remains of 4 babies were found at her home. The decomposed remains were discovered by officers from Merseyside Police during an investigation last September. Bernadette Quirk, who's 55, will appear at St Helens Magistrates Court tomorrow. Sainsbury's has announced its latest results this morning. Like-for-like sales at the supermarket up 1.1% for the first 3 months of this financial year. Total sales rose 7.6%. The firm's CEO, Justin King, said their performance was... This is the Live Desk, Monday to Friday at 9 and 1 o'clock. The sport now with Jackie.
Thanks very much, Adina.
Coming up next on the Live Desk, the latest jobless figures are out, and that's in the next few minutes. We'll bring them to you just as soon as it happens. Watching the Live Desk on Sky News. The headlines now. President Obama has this morning vowed to make BP pay in full for the damage caused by the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. A review of drink driving limits is recommending tough new restrictions on the legal alcohol level. And a serious case review into the kidnapping of the schoolgirl Shannon Matthews is expected to cast new light on the failures of government agencies to protect her. And the latest unemployment figures are out very shortly. In just a few moments' time, Paul Harrison joins me now. So where were we at last time and what are we thinking?
Well, let's take the figures that we got last time, and that was a figure of up 53,000 in terms of the number of jobless.
I can just stop you there, actually, because we're hearing that it's up, is that right? 23,000 between February and April to 2.47 million. That's official figures showing today. Unemployment increased by 23,000 between February and April, 2.47 million.
Yeah, that's a figure that compares with 2.51 million, which was the highest figure since 1994. I think what we should do probably, Charlotte, is look generally at the overall picture. It's not great. Do you remember last year there was an awful lot of talk about perhaps the jobless figure reaching around about 3 million. Whilst it doesn't seem like that's going to happen anytime soon, what we're seeing is fear that whilst we're coming out of a recession on paper, employers aren't simply going out there and employing people in vast numbers. They're perhaps a little bit conscious of the fact that there are cuts looming ahead. David Cameron said there's going to be a lot of pain for everybody, and so there's going to be a really slow recovery in the jobs market. They're having to balance cuts with also stimulating the jobs market, and that's going to be very tough for them to do. And
let me just have a quick look at the job seekers allowance one, if I can click to that right page. The number of people claiming job seekers allowance fell by 30,900 to 1.48 million. So what do we make of that?
Well, that's an increase on the last figure that we got. That was 27,000 in April. So that is an increase of several thousand of those who are not claiming benefits. So whilst we're seeing that perhaps there is a certain degree of positivity in this, I think we're in for a long period of still sustained, difficult period within the jobs market. I think perhaps whilst we won't see necessarily an improvement this year, even next year, it may take several years for there to be a resurgence in the job market.
Paul, thanks for that. Well, let's go to Chris Grayling now, the Minister for Employment, who joins us live from our Westminster studio. So what do you make of these figures this morning?
Well, they underline the nature of the challenge that we face.
And what about the proposed cuts that you're planning? That's going to make the job situation a lot worse, isn't it?
Well, I think it's all about trying to get business moving. I mean, government can't provide an endless source of money to provide jobs in this country. It's about creating wealth, it's about creating enterprise, and we've got to really make Britain a great place to do business in again. That's why we said that we mustn't go ahead with the jobs tax next year. That's why we also said that we've got to do more to deregulate business. It's, for example, one of the reasons we've announced a review of health and safety legislation in order to try and reduce the burden and the costs on business. It's all about creating a vibrant and dynamic private sector which will start creating jobs again in the numbers we need.
You've done research on the number of job losses there might be if these cuts go ahead in the way that are being planned.
Well, the reality is there are a number of different forecasts around for unemployment. Our goal is to try and get unemployment as low as we can possibly get it. We'll only achieve that if we can really get a vibrant and dynamic private sector creating jobs again. But you know, the other thing that's a real problem in these figures is that they show the highest levels of economic inactivity amongst working age adults on record. We still have nearly 5 million people who've been stranded on out of work benefits long before the recession ever started. And so the other big challenge for us when we introduce our Stronger New Work programme next year is to make sure that as the economy does recover, when the private sector is creating jobs again, that we move people off benefits and into work and make sure we maximise for those people the opportunities that will be there in the future.
I just want to pin you down on this, though, because every analysis that has been done on it seems to suggest that the hundreds of thousands of jobs will be lost as a consequence. The unions are very concerned about this. You know, is that something that's been sufficiently looked into?
Well, David Cameron said there are tough decisions ahead, but the reality is, if we carry on with a deficit the size that we've got at the moment, what it will do is it'll cost not just the government, but everyone in this country more to borrow money. That'll be higher mortgages, it'll be higher interest costs for business, and that will mean fewer jobs in the private sector in the future. So for government to carry on running a massive deficit isn't a solution to the problem. It actually makes it more difficult for us to get our economy really back onto its feet where it should be.
Chris Grayling, thanks very much. Well, the government's planned public sector cuts will weaken the economy and cause job losses in both the public and the private sector. That's the warning coming from the TUC this morning, following Nick Clegg's announcement that the £160 billion annual bill for public sector pay will be examined. With us from Westminster is the TUC General